Hello, HalfStack Online. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about internationalization and data visualizations. As you know, we work from home in these wild coronavirus times. So my name is Naomi Meyer, and I work as a software development engineer at Adobe, and this is me online and my website where I'll post some more information where I'd also love to continue the conversation online. So if you saw anything or heard anything that you thought was kind of meaningful or that you have a strong opinion about, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. So, we're in the midst of this global pandemic, and we've seen, with this flatten the curve example, that data visualizations are powerful international communication tools. And they can be used to effectively communicate a story and to share critical information across the world. So I've been thinking a lot about data visualizations because I was tasked to build one on my team at Adobe, where I was also working on internationalization and localization. So these two kind of big ideas, translating our apps and making them useful for diverse audiences around the world, and also communicating really critical information, data, often in the context of news, in a data visualization. I've been thinking a lot about the intersection of those two ideas. So that's what I want to share with you today. So here's kind of an example of what I'm talking about. Here is a data visualization that I'm sure we've all seen similar examples of related to COVID-19. And this one is from The Guardian. So if we take this visualization and we go into the browser and we translate it into Chinese, we can see a few little tweaks that are necessary to really internationalize the data visualization. So the first thing that we need to do is make sure to format numbers, integers correctly across each distinct locale. And also keep in mind, design aspects like colors. Colors can have different cultural significance that can really vary across regions. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, of course, dates and times need to be formatted correctly across regions. And, this is the Chinese example, but if we go into the browser and we translate into Arabic, we can see some right to left bugs that need to be addressed to internationalize for right to left locales. So this is kind of our agenda for today. We're going to go into some definitions just to make sure to level set and make sure we're all on the same page. And then we'll talk about numbers, dates and times, right to left, and then go into iconography and a bit of emojis. And finally, we'll end on colors. So overall, my goal for today is to encourage you all, my fellow developers, to try and create experiences that are equally usable, relevant, and meaningful for users across the globe, to really amplify the voices of our global users. So I know there's really exciting JavaScript and front-end technologies like D3 or Vega or React visualization tools. And those are great, but I'm not going to get into the guts of those frameworks today. Instead, I want to focus on kind of big ideas and thoughts that we can keep in mind to avoid our assumptions when building data visualizations. So with that in mind, let's start with some definitions. So the sort of framework that we often talk about at Adobe, I'm on the globalization team, so we support the translation, localization, and internationalization of Adobe products across the Creative Cloud and Document Cloud. And this is the paradigm that we talk about, where we have the most granular level of translation, followed by localization, and then internationalization that fall under the umbrella of globalization, which, can also include non-engineering ideas like legal and marketing and sales. And this is, I think, a useful framework. But the more I think about it, the more I look at it, I think there's kind of another higher order component, if you will, that these fall under. And I think those are accessibility and innovation. Because culture is deeply rooted in our thinking patterns, and culture can affect how our users interact with and benefit from digital experience. So internationalization really goes beyond translation. And by acknowledging cultural characteristics and celebrating differences, we're creating with innovation. There's lots of tech innovations like touchscreens and text messaging and voice assistants that were originally built for accessibility, for disabled users, and they are, universally loved. So by broadening our minds and building in a different way for the whole world, we can really innovate. Another reason why I think this is really important and I'm passionate about internationalization is because if you look at these two visualizations, they kind of tell a different story. So the line chart here shows, on the left, shows that the majority of people in the world do not speak English as their first language, whereas the pie chart that shows the percentage of websites using content languages, we can see that the majority of online website digital content is in English. So I see these two differences as really an opportunity for us to improve. So let's talk about how we can do that. Let's get into numbers around the world. So here's just a quick visualization of the representation of various numbers. And I see them and I really think, numbers are beautiful. And instead of hard coding a number directly in an app, what we can do is use the JavaScript native Intl API. And this example is creating a reusable formatter instance where we can pass in the user's locale and the number. So here, for example, on line 5, we're passing in the locale of English and the number of that long integer 123 blah, 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 blah trillion. And since it enables a reusable formatter instant, it's more efficient than other methods. And if we look at this displayed, we can see that English example where the comma is included every third integer for this long number. In German, instead of including the comma, we see a period. In Russian, we see a space. And then what fascinates me, in Tamil and Hindi, we can see a comma, but it's included in a different location within the integer. And that's because of a different number ordering system. So this is a great start. But then in a lot of data visualizations, like this example from Gapminder, we can see a long number, right? So if we look at the axes here circled, when we translate the Gapminder visualization into Russian, I've highlighted in red on the axis that this long number of 16,000 and 32,000 are shortened with a K for 1,000, which is what we do, in English. But that's not the correct locale-aware compact notation of 16,000 in Russian. So we can fix this bug using the same JavaScript intl object. And we can pass in the notation as compact, which is an optional parameter. And I'm really excited about these optional parameters because they're currently in experiment mode and they're available in Chrome, and hopefully in the future they'll be available in additional browsers. And you can check out that documentation for more information about notation compact. But I think this is really exciting because often, we want to create more human-friendly, human-readable numbers in our data visualizations. So if we pass in that same long number, we can see a wide variety across locales with the locale-specific symbols. So, again, we see in Tamil and Hindi the comma in a different place and the locale-specific symbol. And then we see in Arabic and Farsi the bidirectional numbers reading right to left, which we're going to get into later. Another exciting addition to the INTL object number format tool is Notation Scientific. And here's just a simple example where we can pass style as unit and unit as meter per second. And again, this is so important. Instead of hard coding our scientific notation, we can also pass the notation as engineering. And these are, I believe, in the TC39 proposal from Matthias Baynards and Shane Carr at Google. So, kudos to them for really improving and adding additions to the JavaScript INTL object. So here's a data visualization that has been correctly formatted and localized into Japanese, and we can see the correct locale-aware symbols that are highlighted in red. So let's move on to dates and times around the world, which of course is a challenging topic for everyone. So let's go talk a bit about time zones. So time zone conversion is notoriously confusing in computing. And that's why I love this visualization, because it's bright and jarring and difficult, just like time zones. So we can see here visualize the 25 nautical time zones that are separated by lines of longitude. And most time zones on land have a standard time offset from Coordinated Universal Time, or UTC. And most are by whole numbers, like UTC plus 8, UTC minus 12. But several are offset by 30 minutes or 45 minutes from the nearby hourly offset. And then if that's not confusing enough, time zone is not always equal to offset UTC, because many time zones have more than one offset due to daylight saving times or summer times rules. So this is important, to get correct. And often we are displaying the time for today across locales in a data visualization. So, I definitely encourage folks to read more if they're interested. I find time zones fascinating. And then the dates, right? So what day is it today? It depends on where you're asking. And, in some locations or some languages, this could be May 12th, 2020. In some places, this could be December 5th, 2020. And that's something, you want to be intentional about and not confuse your users. So JavaScript to the rescue. Here's a simple example of the same INTL object. Here we're passing in date time format, and we're passing in a range. So we're formatting the range from the start date to the end date. And if we look at how that's displayed, we can see December 3rd through the 6th across locales, and that variety is so fascinating. And, JavaScript INTL object is awesome, but if you want to use some additional tools, these are some React recommendations I have. The React INTL tool from Format.js. i18next creates React i18next, and they have other Angular and I believe Vue versions. And then Facebook recently open sourced their FBT, Facebook Translate, and I love Moment.js. It's a big, popular open source project for formatting dates and times. And final shout out, if you're interested, the INTL object has a lot there. Read about it on MDN. And the additions that are in experiment mode, I think, are really exciting. And I hope, as a JavaScript community, we can continue to expand the INTL object, because then we don't need to, negatively impact performance by loading all these additional libraries. So let's move on to right to left around the world. Arabic is the 5th largest spoken language around the world. And if you add Pashto, Urdu, Farsi, Hebrew, Kurdish, there are many hundreds of millions of native right-to-left speakers. So I think, from a business perspective, from a human perspective, supporting right-to-left, while it's not super easy, it is useful to support users who natively read right-to-left languages. So, I grew up in the US. I am a native English speaker, so I think it's helpful to think about right to left using a story. So this is the story that is often cited. I'm not even 100% sure if it's true or not, but the story goes that these advertisers went to Saudi Arabia and wanted to advertise Coca-Cola. So they built this storyboard where in a left to right context, someone's, lying on the desert, they drink Coke, and then they're happy and running. But they forgot that where they were advertising is right to left. So the story actually reads, someone's running and happy, they drink Coca-Cola, and then they're lying on the desert. So this is, that mental shift of right to left that's important to keep in mind. Here's another example of a data visualization from Lebanon of this infographic where you can see the cute icons that are reading from the green to the left there in red. So this is really a mental shift. Right to left users will typically start their eyes in the right side of the page. And we can see here that all of the text in this infographic is reading right to left. And that's true for strings, characters, text, but numbers are different. So this is an example of Hebrew where we can see bidirectional numbers. So, English, Spanish, French are monodirectional languages where everything is reading in the same order. But in Hebrew, we can see that the text is reading right to left. But then simultaneously in line, we see the numbers, the integers, read left to right. So there's two directions happening in line. And then there's another fun example here where we have the English text and numbers that are left to right, and then Hebrew text reading right to left, but then Hebrew numbers that are left to right. So you can, handle simultaneous numbers and letters and languages happening in line. And this is important to keep in mind if you have user-generated content in your apps. So here's another example of that right to left paradigm. And this is a Hebrew language 5th grade math book where we can see up on the right, we see the text is reading right to left, but then the number next to it is left to right. And then the X and Y axes are left to right here, but then the mathematical notation highlighted in orange is reading right to left. I'm confusing myself here. And then here's another example where we can see a high school calculus book from Jordan where everything is right to left, and including the numbers are Eastern Arabic numerals. And the chart, the XY axes are labeled with the Eastern Arabic numerals, and the chart is reading right to left here. This is another example of Hebrew from a Wikipedia article where we can see the X and Y axes in this example have been flipped. And the chart, everything is reading right to left. And then finally, this example is from the Diveli language of the Maldives Anti-Corruption League. And the X and Y axes read left to right, but if we look at the numbers, blue is 2018 and green is 2017. So the story of the data visualization reads chronologically right to left. So for me, this just blows my mind the more I think about bidirectional numbers. But we have tools that can help us. Airbnb has the React with Direction tool, and Kent Dodds has the right to left CSS in JS tool to help us. And there's more awesome open source projects available to help. So overall, the goal with this is to really just avoid your assumptions and to, think about how someone reading right to left might perceive or misperceive your data visualization. So let's move on to iconography around the world. So all imagery and iconography is closely related to society, culture, beliefs, religions, and political values. That's why it is so important to be careful and intentional when selecting images for different regions. So here we have an example from Adobe's design system called Spectrum. And under their section about international design, they talk about when picking pictures that include people, it's important to pick pictures of folks that are dressed appropriately for the region. And to remember that the definition of what is appropriate attire for different regions can really change. And then this other example, we have a picture of feet, the soles of someone's feet. And it could, be used in the context of kicking back and relaxing, maybe in the United States. But in parts of Southeast Asia, and particularly Thailand, displaying the soles of your feet is considered very rude and offensive. So this would not be an appropriate image in Thailand. And that's why it's really important to be respectful and aware of different cultures and manners and use them correctly in regions. Another one to consider is what is correct or incorrect. So in a past life, I worked as an English teacher in Japan, and I originally started grading my students' homework, and I used a check to indicate correct, because, that's how I mark correct in my Western context. But the parents called me and they said, why did my student get everything wrong? Because in Japan, a check does not mean correct. Instead, they use a circle to indicate correct. So I had to go back and fix my students' homework. And that's why I think it's important to remember that, correct or incorrect, sometimes it can be a check, sometimes it can be a circle, sometimes it can be an X, and that's something you want to get correct. So let's move on to emojis. I think emojis are fascinating because they're used by billions of people across the world, in their daily communication. So Gretchen McCullen, the author of the book Because Internet, and Ben Metlock, the CTO of SwiftKey Keyboard, they did a study about the linguistic secrets found in emojis based on SwiftKey Keyboard statistics. And they found that these 4 emoji categories were used more heavily in certain regions. So first we have heart emojis. These were used most by French speakers. Paris is the city of love. And then flower emojis were used 4 times more by Arabic speakers than any other language. And drug emojis were used most in Portugal Portuguese and Australian English, some of the countries that happen to have very permissive drug laws. And finally, Santa emojis were used most in Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish, which is, close to the North Pole. Another fascinating study of emojis. These authors in a scholarly paper hypothesized that respondents would perceive these 9 emoji categories that include emotion differently based on gender or age. And after asking over 400 respondents in different languages, they found that for the unamused face and the face screaming in fear, older and younger respondents perceived those differently. And then the face with rolling eyes, they found to have a gender variant. So overall, I think with emojis, icons, pictures, it's good to avoid assumptions and also good to avoid gestures, sarcasm, and slang, because these are things that are very difficult to translate and are easy to mistranslate. I've included a link there to the Anti-Defamation League. They have a database of hate symbols, which, in some contexts includes emojis like Pepe the Frog or the OK hand symbol. That, you just really want to do your homework and make sure that you're not accidentally using a symbol that could be misperceived or have alternate meanings that you don't intend. So speaking of emojis, important to remember that emojis are like fonts. They vary significantly sometimes across these different platforms. So here we have the microbe emoji, which we can see, in Google. Looks a lot different than the Apple version. And, recently with the spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19, we've seen a lot of these emojis across the internet. And then the face with mask emoji, again, has this variance across platforms, these different fonts. Emojipedia has a really interesting studies and analysis of emoji usage across the internet, and they've seen this huge uptick. I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone that the mask, microbe, and bandage head emoji have increased. And it's important to remember, the historical context of your iconography and think about these ideas when building our data visualizations. So finally, let's move on to colors across the world. Color is a major factor in creating effective data visualizations. but colors have different meanings and cultural significance across the world. So Cassia St. Clair, in her book, The Secret Lives of Color, talks about the great dress debate of 2015, where you might remember there was this squall and dismay online about this dress that half of the internet saw it as blue and black and the other half of the internet saw it as gold. So it really made us acutely aware of our brain's processing and the neuroscience of color and vision, how an internet full of people could look at the same image and see different colors. So she argues that colors should be understood as subjective cultural creations. And, I could really talk your ear off about all of these different fascinating color ideas, but let's look at some sort of extreme examples to really understand this point. So first, the color red. In many Western contexts, red is a stop sign. It's danger, warning, error messages. But here we have an image of a traditional Chinese wedding ceremony. And then on the right, we see a red envelope, which is used during the Chinese New Year to pass money. So, in a Chinese context, red is a color that means prosperity, bliss, wealth, good luck. And then also red has a different meaning in ancient Inca tradition. And in the middle, we see an image of the ancient Inca deity Mamahuoco, who is said to have emerged from the cave of origin wearing a red dress. Also the color white. Here we have an image of a Hindu funeral where all of the family members of the person who have died are wearing white. And in some places, widows are required to wear white. And then we have a traditional Chinese funeral where, again, the family members of the person who have died are wearing white. So, in some places, white is for weddings and, more of a happy color. And in some places, white is for funerals and is more of a sad color. And then the color purple. So there's this story about Julius Caesar. After his son was born with Cleopatra, he wore these purple Tyrian robes. And then laws were passed that said only emperors could wear Tyrian purple in Italy. So purple has been a color associated with bad luck in parts of Italy. And then here we have the Vatican, where, the Pope dresses everything in purple for Lent. So we have the tools in our CSS or CSS and JS toolbox to build different color modes or color themes. Here, is a simple example where we have dark mode and light mode. So technically, we could apply this same logic to languages or regions. Here we have a markup where we have the language tag directly in the HTML, and we can access that language tag with a lang pseudo class or a lang selector. And technically, we do have the ability to apply different color meanings to our data visualizations to support sort of the culturalization of our data visualizations for distinct users. So overall, I want to end here with the idea that we have this function called internationalize our data visualizations, and for a global audience will return improved experiences and amplified voices. I think it's important for us all to avoid our assumptions, broaden our minds, innovate, and build for the whole world wide web. Thank you so much. Let's continue the conversation online.
Thanks, Naomi, for that amazing session.
Thanks.
So I was really wondering by the end of your talk, when do you think we're going to get a web standard for internationalizing emojis?
Ooh. I think emojis are just so fascinating because billions of people use them online every day. And if you look at them in terms of reach, they're more powerful and used more commonly across the world than even the English language. So I think things like diversity in emojis and, the recent addition with the skin tone modifier and the gender modifier, those are things that I think are really exciting and important. And I hope that we continue to, think about emojis both from a technical perspective and from a more human perspective. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I've often wondered, like, is it appropriate to assume that someone from a particular country should have a particular skin tone emoji? And then I'm like, I just don't want to touch this, so I'm just going to back off and I'll let people smarter than me figure this out.
Totally. I actually was curious. I looked it up, and the Unicode Consortium selected 5 skin tone colors based on the Fitzpatrick scale, which is what dermatologists use for exposure to ultraviolet light. So it doesn't have anything to do with race. It's just about exposure to ultraviolet light.
Wow, that is fascinating. I never thought I'd be thinking about dermatology color patterns in the context of internationalization before. And I also think that, one of the top feature requests we've had today is going to be to add faster ways to do emojis in our chat. And we're working on it for the next one. But I think emojis just really change the way we can communicate clear concepts in a single image. And that's what's so amazing and internationalizable about them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So obviously we're all at home right now. How have you been coping with this whole coronavirus stay-at-home stuff?
Yeah, so I was in New York City and just stuck in my tiny little apartment, and my sister convinced me to come out and stay with her in Colorado in the mountains. And a few weeks ago, I arrived in Colorado, and it's just been so nice to be out of the city, some fresh air. We've been going backcountry skiing and just trying to, relax and get outside in a safe way. How about you?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of yoga, which one of my hobbies is teaching and doing yoga. And so I've been doing a lot of YouTube streaming of yoga and taking a lot of walks. What's interesting is I've been taking my son bike riding at night, and the streets are just empty. It's amazing. We're in Arizona, like in the suburbs, which is pretty cool. What was travel like to get there? Did you fly or did you drive, or how did you get there? And was it just weird and different?
Yeah, I flew, and I thought the airplane was going to be empty, but it was actually full.
Oh, whoa.
From New York to Denver, and I had on 2 masks and like a face shield.
3 or 4 months ago, people were posting joke photos of people wearing hazmat suits on planes, and now it's like, hey, good job with your PPE, man.
Yeah. In the New York airport, it was definitely like that.
Yeah, a couple days ago, there was an anonymous lawsuit filed by 2 NFL players who said against United Airlines for a woman who forcibly removed their masks and was like fondling them inappropriately. She was very drunk. And it was the weirdest article because it was like, one, these people were like wearing masks and they weren't being left alone. And then 2, the airline did nothing about it. And it was just like, so I'm like, I travel a lot, but I'm not looking forward to traveling until this is all better. Yeah.
Definitely. And I had my cat with me, and she was just meowing.
Oh, she's been making a few appearances as we were prepping for this interview too. I was telling you right before we were chatting here was that before the coronavirus, you'd be on a video chat. People would expect you to be perfect. And now people are like, hey, cat, hey, kid. And it's like, we've reminded ourselves that we're not robots. We're humans. We can do stuff together. We can be real. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And it's kind of what HalfStack's about, I think. So,
Absolutely. Love that.
Yeah. So how did you get started with your interest in data visualization, internationalization, and all this? Like, was that a long time thing, or how did you get passionate about it, I guess is the question I have.
Totally. I started my career as an English teacher in Asia. I worked for, a school year in Japan, in Taiwan, in Myanmar, Burma. And then I joined the Peace Corps, and I worked in West Africa in a country named Burkina Faso. And
one I haven't been to.
Just the experience of, not understanding the local language and really needing something to be translated, makes me feel passionate about trying to translate things for other people so that they can, understand and really connect with the content. Yeah. And I think we have really cool, exciting engineering opportunities to build for the world. And I hope that, as developers, we can include people, who speak different languages and make our products accessible to a wider range. And that's what makes me passionate about it. It was funny. One of my relatives sent me a picture. They went to a hospital, and there was a sign on the wall that had like, which language do you speak? Touch the, a chart that had, about 50 different languages in the local language.
Oh, nice.
So people go and like touch the language that they recognize, and then, people could help them find it at translator. And I just thought, like, that's it. That's what we need for the internet.
Yeah, I know. I remember early in my career, people would be like, well, only English-speaking people are great software engineers. And I was like, well, isn't that because all the documentation's in English? And they're like, oh. And it was just like this never realized that if you're having to translate from another language just to be able to explain your concepts, it slows you down. It's a barrier to entry, So
there's this fascinating talk. I'm remembering the name off the top of my head, but I think it was from JSConf, where they talk about compiling Go code into another language. And I forgot the exact language, but the talk is amazing. And just the concept of like, instead of using, your variables in English and with ABC characters, to be able to use a different character set and different, glyphs in your code.
Emojis, obviously. We used to joke when jQuery was popular that we were fine with the dollar function, but we wanted the euro function because it had more bling and it was worth more. But it's not a valid variable name in JavaScript.
That's funny.
So Unicode itself is a pretty interesting, complex beast. And I think there's just a lot people don't realize that goes on behind the scenes. What sort of things are fascinating to you about that space?
Oh, so many things. Last year, I was so happy. I had the chance to go to the Unicode conference and meet a lot of the people and listen to sort of the behind the scenes action. And it just blew my mind because like UTF-8, like that's sort of the pipes of the behind the scenes, like the inner functioning of computers, and converting things from zeros to ones into ABC. And that process, I think, is so fascinating. Like if you type an emoji, if you type a smiley face as a string and do dot split or dot length, it's not one.
Right.
It's a Unicode character, and that's so interesting.
That is so cool. I actually remember when UTF-8 was new and it didn't work anywhere. I mean, I've been doing this a while, but still, it's pretty funny. It's like, it was such a changer, but there was like this painful period of like 5 years where it sort of worked in some places and not others. And it was kind of like any new technology. It was pretty crazy. And I sort of feel like with JavaScript, we're finally getting to the point where internationalization is a solvable problem, where, we've got a new spec that's itself almost as large as the JavaScript spec itself, just for internationalization with JavaScript, the ECMA 402. It would have been funnier to me if it had been ECMA 404, but that's beside the point. But I guess let's close with like, if there's one thing that the web could fix now or add, what would that be for you?
That's a good question. I think I am passionate about internationalization because I think it's good for people and, making the web more accessible for a wider range of, diverse users. But a lot of, fellow developers tell me that internationalization is painful and, the process of localizing their code is a headache. So if we could make it easier for developers to just externalize their strings or, format their dates and times.
Time zones alone are a big pain. The amount of logic to accurately represent all time zones ever is massive. And like I live in Arizona, which just decides to have its own time zone separate from everyone else because we don't need more daylight to be saved. So yeah. Definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thanks for your great session, and we'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.